Imagine a quiet night when the air slowly descends into silence and all the noise of the day has long faded away. Imagine, too, the body beginning to feel lighter, as if even gravity has given pause so that the mind may wander freely, without burden, without rigid direction. In this calm, we begin a long journey, not with footsteps, but with imagination flowing like the current of an ancient river. We will move through the layers of time, walking along roads no longer visible on the earth's surface, toward the ancient cities of Egypt long buried beneath desert and time. Cities that once teemed with life, now reduced to faint whispers in incomplete legends and fragments of history. In this moment, allow yourself to relax. Release the weight pressing upon your shoulders, and let your breath fall slowly, for this narration is not meant to rush, but to carry you gently in the current of words. There is nothing you must do, nothing you must pursue. Only let the voice within read in a soft rhythm, like the endless song of the desert. The cities we are about to wander are not places marked on modern tourist maps, nor the cities loudly recounted in the history books of schoolrooms. They are cities that vanished, buried beneath sand for thousands of years, forgotten by great kingdoms, yet still holding remnants of lives that were once vivid and real. We will not seek definite answers, for answers do not always exist, and perhaps are not needed at all. What we shall do is walk slowly in imagination, seeing the shadows of houses that remain only as foundations, hearing the echo of footsteps that are no longer there, and sensing faint presences lingering among ruins that have lost their form. These shadows will become companions for sleep. These stories will serve as pillows, and each word will fall like a blanket covering you in peace. So let your body rest. Let your thoughts drift, for the forgotten cities of ancient Egypt will soon open slowly. Not with a shout, but with a whisper, like a bedtime tale spoken only between stars and sand. Amidst the vast desert, beneath a sky that seems never to change, Egypt holds secrets older than many civilizations we know. The desert may appear silent, yet beneath its stillness, it is a loyal guardian, concealing traces of cities that once stood proudly by the riverbanks, at crossroads of trade routes, or at the foot of mountains that now appear only as dark silhouettes in the distance. Imagine the expanse of sand so wide its edges cannot be discerned, sand that drifts endlessly with the wind, swallowing everything that human hands once built with pride and devotion. Beneath those layers lie sun-dried bricks crumbling away, temple walls split apart, streets once alive with footsteps, now nothing more than corridors of silence without direction. When we close our eyes, we can try to see differently, not with eyes fixed on the present, but with eyes that allow themselves to be pulled back into the past. There, behind the silent desert, the forgotten cities seem to breathe once more, with a faint pulse felt only through imagination. As you sit quietly, imagine how once the same sun shone upon rooftops of mud brick houses, upon markets bustling with merchants from afar, upon children running through narrow alleys, upon faces we can no longer recognize. All of this once existed, once was real, and once was part of a life that moved forward, unaware that one day their city would vanish, swallowed by desert sands forgotten by generations, leaving behind only faint traces that even archaeologists cannot fully piece together. In the stillness of this night, we attempt to hear that voice again, a voice not heard with the ears, but within the heart. A voice from thousands of years ago that simply says they once were. And within that whisper, we are invited to walk slowly, so that the forgotten story may rise again, not as a complete answer, but as a soothing shadow, like a dream arriving without being called. Around 2500 BC, upon a stretch of land that now appears barren, Egypt rose as a civilization towering between the desert sands and the eternal Nile. That river, flowing endlessly without pause, was the source of life, but also the silent witness to cities now leaving behind only faint traces. Along its banks stood not only pyramids, but also settlements, lost, streets erased, and temples buried beneath the weight of time. These cities, whose names are no longer known, were once places where people gathered, traded, prayed, and dreamed. Slowly, however, the river shifted, sandstorms came, and life moved away, leaving behind empty walls that eventually crumbled. Imagine cities not as fortunate as Memphis or Thebes, cities whose names were never carved into sacred texts or stone inscriptions. Cities whose existence can only be guessed from fragments of pottery or fragile mud bricks. These are the forgotten cities, those that vanished beyond the shadow of our imagination, beyond the Egypt we know only through pyramids and pharaohs. Ancient Egypt holds far more mysteries than merely its grand tombs and monumental temples. There are layers of life seldom spoken of, a world never recorded in detail by the scribes of the palace. Their daily life unfolded. Merchants from distant lands brought spices and cloth. Children's laughter mingled with the sound of craftsmen's hammers, and small rituals were performed to pray for rain or protection from deities whose names we may never know. These cities were no less important than the pyramids, yet they were fragile, easier to vanish, and quicker to be forgotten. Time is a patient eraser, and the desert sands are the pages that cover it. Now we can only touch their remnants with care, trying to understand stories never written, stories that linger only as faint shadows, demanding us to reimagine them. In this way, the forgotten cities of Egypt still seem to breathe, though only through our quiet and gentle imagination. Imagine a city built along the Nile, not with massive stones like the pyramids, but with mud bricks taken from the riverbanks, dried beneath the blazing sun and stacked into walls of houses, workshops, and storerooms. That city may once have been full of life, filled with the sounds of marketplaces, the aroma of baking bread, and the morning calls of birds. Yet such a city was fragile, for mud brick crumbles before time and before the rare but fierce rains. No one truly knows how many cities vanished in this way, for archaeologists find only faint traces buried deep beneath the desert. Sometimes just a low foundation remains, sometimes only fragments of pottery left behind. But from those fragments, we can imagine how the city once stood, how narrow alleys connected one home to another, how sunlight slanted into small streets, and how life pulsed even without monuments strong enough to survive for millennia. Some ancient Greek writers spoke of great cities no longer visible. writing of labyrinths greater than pyramids, of broad streets and buildings adorned with carvings. Yet when we search for them, we find only stretches of sand, as though the earth itself swallowed the city whole. There are also accounts of bustling trading towns where small boats once docked, bringing grain, oil, or precious stones, but now there is nothing but an empty desert. It is as if time swept away every trace, leaving us with questions that can never truly be answered. Did those cities really exist? Or were they only myths born of the imagination of foreign travelers passing briefly through Egypt? This is what makes the forgotten cities so compelling, for they rest on the threshold between reality and legend, between facts that can be unearthed and stories that can only be believed with the heart. When we speak of the forgotten cities of Egypt, our imagination often clings to vast, endless deserts, with shifting sands constantly covering the traces of the past. Yet those cities were not only in the desert. Some may have stood in the delta, in regions now covered by fields or modern villages. A lost city might lie beneath the homes of villagers unaware that they live atop a history thousands of years old. Others may be buried beneath the mud of the Nile, drowned by shifting waterways or great floods that slowly covered the structures with layers of silt. Such conditions make the discovery of these cities all the more difficult, for their traces are so faint, as if intentionally hidden to never be found again. And within that obscurity arose countless folk tales passed from one generation to another. Stories of sunken golden cities, vanished palaces, or cursed treasures never to be touched. All of this deepens the veil of mystery that surrounds the forgotten cities, leaving us torn between belief and doubt. Historians of the past, both the Egyptians themselves and foreign writers, often left contradictory accounts. Some wrote with detail, describing cities with tall walls, bustling markets, and soaring temples. Others wrote only briefly, mentioning a name with no explanation. These contradictions lead modern scholars to wonder whether what they wrote was a faithful reflection or merely imagination embellished into story. Yet one thing is clear. Within these records lies a recurring theme, an acknowledgement that Egypt was not only pyramids and royal tombs, but also ordinary cities that formed the heartbeat of thousands of lives. Cities that no longer exist, yet once served as homes, marketplaces, places of worship, and the cradle of generations born and gone. These lost cities, though fragile, hold a profound role in helping us understand who the ancient Egyptians truly were, not only through their grand symbols, but also through their quiet, everyday lives. Imagine a morning in one of the cities no longer marked on any map, a city that once stood along the Nile, where the air was still cool before the sun scorched the desert with its light. Narrow streets made of hardened clay wound between small houses, their mud walls painted in pale tones resembling the sand. From doorways drifted the scent of bread baking in earthen ovens, mingled with the fragrance of freshly ground grain. Children ran barefoot, leaving tiny prints in the dusty earth, while mothers busied themselves with food preparations in steady, unhurried motions. In the market, traders began to open their stalls, laying out baskets of river fish, vegetables from gardens at the city's edge, or simple jewelry of copper and glass beads. The sound of bargaining arose, not as shouts, but as flat conversations, like the steady flow of water. Life unfolded without grandeur, but with a rhythm calm, ordered, and nearly unhurried. Yet behind that simplicity lay details often absent from our imagination of ancient Egypt. How they stored water in large clay vessels kept cool in the shade, or covered small windows with thin cloths to block dust. How they placed small amulets in corners of their homes, believed to ward off evil spirits or illness. Workers, before leaving for fields or workshops, often offered brief prayers to their protective deities, though not always within temples. There were also faint traces of darkness, the whip marks across the back of a laborer forced to toil too hard, or the weary face of a mother who had lost her child to fever that could not be cured. These too were part of life, simple yet layered with stories never carved in stone, lingering only as fragile shadows beneath the sand. These cities were not always grand. Not all had towering temples or palaces. Many were merely homes for ordinary people, masons, artisans, farmers, and fishermen. They were not great figures of history, yet their lives formed the foundation of what we now call Egyptian civilization. Without them, kings would have no food, temples no stone, and the river no harvest to carry to great cities. The forgotten towns were the pulse that sustained the grand symbols we admire today, and in every breath of their lives were details so fragile, so easily erased by time. But if we listen quietly, as though walking slowly along their earthen streets, we may still hear the echoes of their footsteps, the murmur of their markets, and the soft prayers they whispered each morning thousands of years ago. Midday in that city arrived with sharp light when the shadows of mud brick houses stretched along narrow streets and people sought refuge from the heat. Workers walked to their workshops, some to the fields, others to the riverbanks to fill large jars with water. The sound of hammers from stonecutters echoed, a repetitive rhythm blending with the cries of birds overhead. In the potter's workshop, a simple wheel was turned by foot. Shaping vessels from wet clay, the craftsman's fingers moving slowly, as though inscribing prayers upon the clay itself. Children sat at the workshop's edge, watching silently, sometimes collecting shards of pottery to play with. Nothing grand occurred, yet each small detail wove together the quiet fabric of life, rarely written into official histories. Amid that busyness, one can imagine other shadows present, unseen yet always believed to be near. Each worker carried a small token at the waist, a simple amulet shaped as an eye or a scarab. Tiny objects thought to protect against misfortune. In the workshop's corner, an older craftsman sat in thought, gazing at the cracked earthen wall, perhaps remembering a child who once worked at his side, but was now gone, taken by illness or by labor too heavy for a fragile body. The city held not only activity, but also quiet losses. Grief unrecorded in hieroglyphs, leaving only faint traces in the memories of those who once breathed its air. As the sun climbed higher, life slowed. People sought shade, and the marketplace's earlier bustle softened into a low murmur. From afar came the sound of small drums from a modest temple at the city center, signaling that midday prayers had begun. Not all citizens attended. Some merely paused, bowed their heads, or touched the ground briefly before returning to their work. There was a sense that life moved between the tangible and the unseen, as though the city itself was a thin bridge between two worlds. Within that calm lingered an echo, leaving us to wonder whether this city was truly lost, or simply waiting to be found again, buried beneath ever-shifting sands. As evening approached, the once harsh sunlight softened, painting the walls of houses with gentle golden tones. Narrow streets filled once more with human voices. Children emerging from the shadows of homes to play with balls made of cloth, or simply to run and laugh among the thin dogs that roamed freely. Merchants returned to the market, rearranging their modest goods. Dried dates, salted fish, woven straw mats used as bedding. An old woman sat by the roadside with a basket full of onions, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes weary yet alert to everyone who passed. She seemed like part of the city itself, as if her body were made from the same dust as the wall surrounding her. In the corner of the marketplace, a wandering poet began reciting verses about the ancient gods, his hoarse voice mingling with the sound of a small flute. Not many listened intently, for most people were occupied with their own affairs. But the words still drifted through the air like fine threads linking the present to a distant past. One can imagine that this city was not only a place of dwelling, but also a stage for memories, prayers, and stories that repeated themselves endlessly, though in the end all would be buried beneath sands that recognized no time. That evening also revealed another side of the city, a more fragile one. Some houses bore cracked walls, some partially collapsed, others propped up with fragile wooden beams close to breaking. There were houses that stood silent, their shutters tightly closed, their doors held shut with stones, perhaps once homes to families long gone, either departed or lost to something uncertain. The city was neither fully alive nor entirely dead, standing in between, keeping its secrets slowly hidden under layers of dust. Night slowly descended upon the forgotten city, bringing cool air that allowed the stone walls to breathe freely after enduring the day's heat. Oil lamps were lit, their dim orange glow reflecting on doors and windows, casting long shadows upon the dusty ground. In the streets, footsteps grew rare, only occasionally broken by the sound of leather sandals brushing against sand, or the creak of wooden wheels from a cart dragged sluggishly by a donkey. The city slipped into a silence of its own kind, one that was never completely quiet. For there was always the whisper of wind carrying distant sounds, perhaps from the desert, perhaps from something older than the city itself. In some houses, small families sat around a large bowl of wheat porridge, sharing with their hands, speaking softly as if afraid to disturb the night. Children yawned while adults stared for long moments into the small flames flickering inside oil lamps. Meanwhile, in an ancient temple at the edge of the city, a priest lit incense, thin smoke climbing into the sky, carrying prayers only half understood by those who heard them. The incense left behind a sweet yet bitter scent, clinging to clothes, slipping into hair, lingering until the following morning. Yet night also opened the door to an unease that never fully disappeared. There were narrow alleys no one walked after dark, for it was said that the spirits of the dead wandered there, searching for a home they would never find. Some whispered of footsteps following them, even when no one was behind, or of dark shadows pressed against walls without an owner. The city lived with two faces, one bright and visible under daylight, and one dark, revealed only when the moon rose slowly over the desert sky. In the center of the city lay a small open square, surrounded by low limestone buildings, where each night the wind circled as if trapped, producing a hissing sound like whispers rising from the ground itself. Few lingered in that square after dark, for there was a belief that beneath its surface lay hidden chambers, corridors built thousands of years before the city was resettled. Old tales spoke of workers who once dug a well nearby, only to hear echoes of voices that were not their own, voices speaking in a language no one could understand. From that day, the work was abandoned. The well was sealed with stone, and the square was left empty, as if granting space to something unseen yet still present. At night, when the moon hung directly overhead, its pale light fell straight into the center of the square, forming a bright circle that never touched the edges. Curious children once tried to play there, hopping over shadows while laughing. But their parents always called them sharply, urging them home before something unwanted might occur. That circle of light was believed to be a doorway, open only for a moment, and though no one knew where it led, all agreed it was not meant to be stepped upon. Adults passing by the square chose instead to walk quickly, heads lowered, pretending not to see anything at all. The city seemed to hold its secrets deep within, secrets that could only be touched through a fear passed down from generation to generation. They lived alongside uncertainty, as though it was woven into their daily breath. There was resignation, yet also reverence, for the city was not merely a dwelling place, but a vessel of old memory, a trace that did not wish to be forgotten, but also not entirely remembered. Night after night, the square remained empty, still whispering with the sound of wind, still a silent point, waiting for an explanation that perhaps would never be found. If one walked further to the eastern edge of the city, they would find a straight road that ended at a tall wall of massive stone, carved with the patience of centuries. The wall stood without significant cracks, though it had endured thousands of summers and the desert storms that battered its surface. No door could be seen, no entrance was apparent, only a faint carving, almost erased by time. The carving depicted a human figure with the head of an animal, seated on a low chair, extending a hand as if offering something to one who stood before it. People never agreed on whether it was an image of a god, a queen, or a guardian, and perhaps because of that uncertainty, the wall was left alone, untouched and undisturbed. Around the wall, small stones lay scattered, yet strangely they always formed a circle that never shifted, even though strong winds swept through every afternoon. Locals believe that this circle of stones was a warning, a boundary not to be crossed, a line separating human space from one older than their civilization. There are notes from a foreign traveler who wrote that he once sat near the circle at night and felt the ground beneath him tremble as though something moved in the belly of the earth. The record ended abruptly with no further explanation, leaving people only to guess whether he left the city or vanished without trace. For those who lived there, the wall and its circle of stones were simply part of the everyday landscape, something accepted without many questions. They walked past it daily, carrying jars of water or baskets of dates, crossing the shadow of the wall without turning their heads, as if their eyes were trained not to look too deeply. Yet in silence, a creeping awe lingered, a sense that the city was built upon layers of secrets far greater than they could imagine. And each sunset, the wall's shadow stretched long across half the road, as if reminding everyone that something older than themselves still remained, waiting, silent, and perhaps watching. Within the city, slowly swallowed by the desert, daily life moved in a calm rhythm, as if time itself flowed more slowly among the narrow alleys and mud brick houses. Each morning, before the sun fully rose from behind the sandhills, women carried jars to the central well, its water cool even as the sand around it began to heat. Children followed behind them, some running barefoot with laughter, others sitting at the well's edge playing with small stones. Men usually left earlier, walking toward the fields near the oasis or the river's edge. A few hours away, carrying wooden hoes and woven baskets to prepare the hard soil. None were hurried, none were rushed, for they knew the desert demanded patience more than strength. Along the main road, a small market began to form by midday. Simple wooden tables covered with worn cloth displayed dried dates, salted fish, and clay pots brought from workshops on the city's outskirts. The smell of charcoal smoke mingled with the scent of finely ground spices, signaling that warm food would soon be ready. People bargained in low voices, never too loud, as though maintaining the balance between the noise of life and the silence enveloping the city walls. Occasionally, the bray of a donkey was heard as it was led down the narrow street, carrying loads of grain or firewood, and the slow steps of the animal seemed to blend with the languid rhythm of the city. In the evenings, as the heat softened, residents gathered in open courtyards to talk, to share stories, or simply to sit in silence. In certain corners, old men taught children to read ancient symbols etched on wooden boards, though not all could understand them. Some records note that the script being taught was not the kingdom's official language, but an older variant, one that even then was nearly forgotten. Some believed it was deliberately preserved, as if holding the key to something that should not be lost. Yet for the children, those symbols were nothing more than a strange game, looping lines difficult to memorize, but repeated nonetheless, because their parents said that was how the traditions of the city were kept alive. Yet behind that calmness, there was always another layer seldom spoken of, a layer that held the darker side of life in this forgotten city. Night often brought a different atmosphere, when the tall walls cast long shadows and the alleys grew so dark that it was hard to distinguish the shape of those who passed. At such times, strange sounds were sometimes heard from beneath the ground, whether from storage chambers or tunnels built long ago. Some said it was merely the wind echoing through cracks in the stone, but others whispered that the city stood upon a network of hidden chambers that had never been fully mapped. Children were forbidden to wander after sunset, not only because of the dangers of desert creatures, but also because of the belief that ancient spirits still roamed, guarding something they considered sacred. The elders often reminded that every house possessed a room that was never used, a small chamber kept tightly sealed and rarely opened. The function of that room was never clearly explained, yet tradition said that each family must have one. Some believed it was meant to store valuables, while others claimed it was a place for small offerings to forgotten gods. Inside, empty jars were sometimes found, symbols etched upon the walls, or merely sand that gathered for no apparent reason. No one truly knew what it all meant, and perhaps it was intended to remain a mystery, something not meant to be understood, but simply passed on. Over time, this custom instilled an unease in daily life. People lived normally, working, joking, and caring for their families. Yet there was always a subtle sense that something unseen was watching. There was never any solid proof, no grand event to confirm the tales. But precisely for that reason, the faint tension endured. The city seemed to wear two faces, one friendly and open by day, and one full of secrets by night, harboring whispers that no one dared to speak aloud. The underground tunnels spoken of in the whispers of the townsfolk were not mere imagination, for some of their entrances could still be found behind ruins or in the corners of old buildings seldom touched. These openings were small and narrow, just enough for a person to stoop and enter. Descending stone steps that had held the damp smell of millennia. No natural light reached inside, so only torches or oil lamps could reveal fragments of the darkness. Yet even such artificial light seemed unable to penetrate far, for the passages branched without any clear pattern, forming a bewildering network. Some local explorers had attempted to map the way, but most returned pale-faced, carrying stories of faint footsteps that followed them from afar. Many of the passages ended abruptly, no more than small chambers filled with sand or broken stone, as if deliberately sealed to conceal something. At certain points, there were larger rooms with simple stone pillars and walls adorned with markings that defied easy understanding. These markings did not resemble the formal hieroglyphs usually found in the great temples of Egypt, but rather rough shapes, primitive symbols that seemed older, as if from a time before writing fully developed. Some were spirals, others tiny handprints, and some resembled eyes watching. No one dared touch or erase them, for old belief held that these symbols were warnings for those who ventured further. The most often told story was of an empty space that felt far too vast compared to the buildings above, as if the earth itself concealed a great hall, though its purpose was never clear. Was it a place of ritual, a hidden burial chamber, or merely a forgotten storehouse? All remained speculation. The sound of dripping water was sometimes heard there, though its source was never found, adding to the impression that something alive still breathed in the darkness. When people emerged from these tunnels, they often carried with them a strange feeling, as though they were still being watched by eyes that never appeared. This sensation could not be explained, yet it endured in the tales passed down through generations. Above ground, life in the ancient city moved as usual, or at least appeared so from the outside. They built homes of mud brick, dried in the sun, with walls thick enough to withstand the heat of day and the chill of night. Narrow streets formed between the low buildings, with small markets where bread, wheat, beer, vegetables, and simple crafts were sold. Yet there was always the sense that daily life brushed against something deeper, something hidden beneath their feet. Children were often forbidden to play too close to tunnel entrances, though their curiosity sometimes pushed them to peek. Adults walked with measured steps, as if aware that every echo of their footsteps also traveled downward, stirring unseen shadows. Social life seemed carried out with simple customs, from family ceremonies to harvest celebrations. Yet each of these festivities was accompanied by a small ritual that appeared to be directed not only toward the known gods, but also toward something unnamed. Offerings of burnt bread, salt, or water were poured into cracks in the ground, as if feeding something in the depths. No one openly spoke of the meaning behind these acts, but their presence was consistent, performed solemnly without many questions. Even in everyday conversations, the shadow of the underground was ever present. Elders often reminded their children not to whistle at night, for it was believed the sound could summon the dwellers of the tunnels. Some workers digging to repair water channels reported finding carved stones, unlike typical Egyptian style, rougher and filled with strange symbols. These stones were usually reburied rather than lifted, with the reasoning that balance must be preserved. Such habits fostered a thick silence, as though society had agreed that there were things best left untouched. Their lives appeared simple, yet always under the shadow of buried secrets, making each day feel like walking on fragile ground that could, at any moment, open a crack into darkness. In the city's main market, the atmosphere often seemed lively. Yet, upon quieter observation, there was a kind of caution in the way people spoke and moved. Bread sellers carefully arranged their loaves, placing the harder pieces at the front and the softer ones at the back, as though following an unspoken rule about what could be shown and what should be hidden. Vendors of wheat beer poured the thick liquid from large jars into clay cups, but often set aside a small portion to be poured onto the ground before handing it to the buyer, a habit performed almost unconsciously. No one openly questioned why, for everyone seemed to understand that the ground was not merely a surface to be walked upon, but something with its own life, something that required small gestures of attention to remain calm. Children running through the crowd were usually watched with worried eyes by their parents. There was a story, told and retold among the people, about a child who vanished in the middle of the market and was never found again. The story was never spoken too loudly, but always lingered as a whispered reminder that the city stood upon secrets that could not be predicted. Even laughter in the market often sounded quieter than in other cities, as if too much joy could awaken something sleeping beneath the earth. The simple houses surrounding the market stood close together, their walls touching, leaving little space for light to enter. From the small windows, the smell of warm bread and spices drifted out. But there was also a constant dampness, as if the air from the underworld was always seeking cracks to escape. At night, people sometimes reported hearing faint sounds rising from beneath their floors, sounds that resembled neither animal nor human, more like a long sigh that refused to be defined. Yet they had grown accustomed to covering their ears and carrying on with life. For in this city, allowing curiosity to grow too far meant opening a door to uncertainty. Life went on, but always with a layer of silence that made everything feel fragile, like a thin thread holding balance between the human world and the world buried beneath their feet. If one walked further away from the market and into the narrow alleys connecting the houses, the atmosphere shifted into silence, as though the bustling life at the city's center was only a fleeting illusion. The alleys twisted and turned, the walls of the houses pressed tightly together, and sunlight dripped only through small gaps above, casting long shadows that moved slowly with time. Along the alleys, small wooden doors appeared fragile, some etched with worn carvings, others nothing more than plain boards sealed shut, as though hiding something inside. Occasionally faint sounds came from behind a door. Not ordinary conversations, but low chants like prayers or songs, which immediately ceased when unfamiliar footsteps approached. The townsfolk often chose to walk quickly through the alleys, their heads slightly lowered, as though the narrow walls had eyes watching. No one truly wanted to stop, even though signs of life were obvious, like the smell of food, the cry of a baby, or a dog barking softly in the distance. They believed the alleys were not mere passageways, but part of something older than the city itself. A pattern thought to exist even before the first houses were built. Oral tradition spoke of the alleys following ancient paths on the ground, lines aligned with something buried far beneath, like shadows of a structure never seen. At night, the alleys became more unsettling, for oil lamps were rarely left burning. Only the moon and stars occasionally gave faint light, glinting on the rough stone walls. Some claimed to have seen a figure moving slowly at the end of an alley, neither human nor beast, only a blurred shape that vanished when approached. But such stories were never spoken of during the day, for the city lived under a silent pact that some things were better left unsaid. Here, peace did not mean nothing was lurking, but was instead a choice to keep walking without turning back, so that the balance between those who lived and those who lingered beneath the earth remained undisturbed. When night fully descended and the market had long grown quiet, life in the city took on a gentler form, as if all the inhabitants had agreed to hold back their voices. From small windows veiled by thin curtains, faint flickers of oil lamps could sometimes be seen, casting a warmth that felt fragile. Inside the homes, families sat in circles by the hearth, not to speak at length, but to keep one another's presence in silence. Children often heard stories from their parents, not tales of heroes or legends of triumph, but reminders never to wander too far beyond the city on certain nights. They were taught to recognize the sound of the wind when it changed, a sound that carried not only sand from the desert, but whispers of something unseen. Prayers became part of the nightly routine, spoken in low tones so as not to disturb the balance. They were not fervent prayers, but whispers, reminders to themselves that they were only small parts of something far greater. Sometimes the prayers blended with soft songs, barely audible, like rhythms aligned with the pulse of the earth. People believed that keeping the night this way would protect them, not from tangible dangers, but from something more elusive, something felt only when all human senses were no longer occupied by the bustle of the day. Yet amid the stillness, there were always moments when a dog barked without clear cause, or a night bird flew low across the rooftops. These subtle signs were seen as warnings, not to inspire fear, but to be remembered. No one sought explanations, for explanations often only brought new unease. In a city that seemed to stand upon layers of secrets, every sound of the night was better accepted as it was. like the beat of a heart that needed no questioning. In this way, calmness endured, though a faint undercurrent of fear always lingered beneath the surface. Dawn arrived slowly, not with sudden brilliance, but with faint streaks creeping along the horizon. The city submerged in the night seemed reluctant to awaken, as if each building needed time to release the long shadows clinging to it. The sand around the city walls reflected the first light with a golden hue, as though the desert itself was breathing after a long night. The crowing of roosters was heard, though not loudly, more like a small sign that life was stirring again. One by one, the townsfolk emerged from their homes, moving slowly, as if still half asleep. Their faces showing a blend of relief and caution, like those who knew the night never truly ended. It only changed form. Morning activities unfolded in simple rhythms. Some women carried clay jars to the well, their steps steady, while children helped with sleepy eyes. Men rearranged their goods in the market, though not every stall would see crowds. For some alleys carried only the sound of footsteps and brief murmurs. The smell of bread baking gently filled the air, mingling with the sharp scent of spices kept overnight. Yet, behind the warmth of such routines, there were always eyes glancing upward, watching the sky for strange signs left behind from the night, whether a faint shimmer at the horizon or a shadow that did not belong. Dawn in this city was never seen as the end of darkness, but as a brief pause between two mysteries. Every beam of sunlight slipping through the walls of houses was only a reminder that the secrets of the night still clung to the earth, waiting to return once the light dimmed again. In this way, the people learned to live in a cycle that was never fully bright, never fully dark, but always balanced on a confusing edge where reality and the unexplainable walked side by side. Daylight arrived without fanfare, only with brightness pressing shadows firmly to the ground. The city seemed livelier. Alleys once empty, now filled with footsteps, voices, and fabrics fluttering in the desert wind. Children ran carrying sticks as if they were swords, while adults busied themselves arranging goods, bargaining, or simply waiting for the chance to sell their work. In the marketplace, the colors of dried fruits, woven cloth, and pottery stood out against the dull city walls, creating a harmony between simple beauty and the necessity of survival. Yet on closer inspection, there were small cracks hinting at something unusual, such as a dead-end street not marked on any map, or a wooden door that never opened though it clearly belonged to someone. The midday air felt heavy. The sun cast heat that made the sands outside the walls quiver like mirages teasing the eyes. Yet inside the city, even as people tried to continue their routines, there was always a strange pause of silence. A merchant in mid-conversation could suddenly fall quiet, staring into the distance as if hearing something no one else did. Children at play might suddenly freeze, their eyes empty, then resume as if nothing had occurred. It was as if the city itself controlled the rhythm, ensuring that life never moved too quickly, leaving space for something unseen to join in. To foreign visitors, the city might appear ordinary, a modest trading hub thriving at the edge of the desert. But to its inhabitants, every noon was a fragile space, where light was not full protection, but a thin curtain easily pierced by what never truly left. Behind laughter, bargaining, and the noise of the market, there always floated a silence like a repeating message that this city did not belong solely to humans, but also to secrets still without a name. Evening arrived with a slow step, like a thin curtain being drawn across a great stage. Golden light began to replace the harsh white glare, and the shadows of houses and towers stretched long, touching the cooler sands beyond the walls. The air started to lose its heaviness. Yet in this moment, the city seemed more aware of itself. The alleys once filled with the noise of the market slowly thinned. Merchants' shouts faded into soft murmurs of people returning home. Children were called inside, their games reluctantly abandoned, leaving dusty ground still marked with small footprints. At the edge of the city, near the seldom used gate, a harder-to-describe sensation lingered. The descending sun cast pale red across the stone walls, making them seem less like inanimate structures and more like skin that breathed. Those who passed that gate often felt another set of eyes watching. Not human eyes, but something that only appeared when the day gave way to dusk. The atmosphere of evening, expected to be calm, instead became fragile, as if each footstep carried an echo to sharp, as though strange ears were listening. For the city's inhabitants, evening was an unwritten boundary, a subtle reminder that life must be drawn slightly inward. Doors closed earlier, oil lamps lit sooner, and conversations softened. No one ever said it plainly, but everyone knew that dusk was the time when something began to walk closer, something not to be ignored. And behind all the small acts of human routine, the city kept a different pulse. A beat that made the surrounding desert feel not merely empty land, but a stage where shadows waited for their turn to appear. Night descended slowly, as if unwilling to startle anyone. Yet precisely in its slowness, it became more perceptible. The sky, once a soft red, turned to deep violet and then to complete black, as stars emerged like needles of light piercing the dark curtain. The sound of the city shifted entirely from clamor to whisper, from hurried steps to cautious movements. Oil lamps hanging at the doors flickered in the faint wind, casting shadows that danced upon the clay walls, shadows often seeming more alive than the person who had lit the flame. In the city's center, near a small and seldom visited temple, guards began their patrol with measured steps. They did not speak loudly, only signaling with their hands or brief murmurs. It was said that on certain nights another sound joined their walk, the sound of footsteps whose source was never clear, but whose rhythm always aligned, as though mimicking or perhaps leading them. Guards who experienced this seldom spoke of it, for there was no answer to decide whether it was imagination or the sign of something far older than the city itself. For some of the inhabitants, night was a refuge, as darkness concealed flaws and granted a reason for rest. Yet for others, the dark was a stage that reopened old doors, doors invisible by day, but felt once light was gone. Tales told that the underground corridors of the city awakened only when night fell, passages stretching into the endless desert, carrying anyone who dared step inside to a place from which return could never be assured. Thus, each time night arrived, the city seemed to transform, from a dwelling for humans into an in-between space, a meeting point between the visible and the hidden. Something always happened when night grew deeper, when the barking of guard dogs weakened and the market was truly empty. Something never announced, yet felt by those accustomed to keeping watch. In certain corners of the city, groups of people emerged who were never seen during the day. They wore no distinctive clothing, carried no recognizable signs, yet their presence was undeniable, as though they were part of the city's architecture, like silent pillars and stones. They walked slowly, carrying small clay vessels sealed tightly, and each time they stopped, they placed the vessel on the ground, touched it briefly, and moved on. No one knew what lay inside. Some claimed it was ancestral ash. Others believed it to be liquid from an underground river, and some said it was merely empty sand as a symbol of void. But no one dared to open and see, for it was told that whoever tried would lose their voice, unable to speak for the rest of their life. The townsfolk often chose not to acknowledge them, even though their eyes clearly saw those figures. They pretended not to notice, for there was a belief that honest sight at night could bring burdens too heavy to bear in the day. Children once tried following from a distance, yet usually returned pale-faced and trembling. And since then, parents strictly forbade anyone from repeating the act. Strangely, after they left, the city's air felt lighter, as if something had been absorbed, whether burden or darkness. Over time, people accepted the group's presence as they did the wind or sand, something unavoidable, yet not worth resisting. The tales of this nocturnal group spread far beyond the city, growing into legends often exaggerated. Foreign merchants claim to have seen them vanish into stone walls, as if the city held secret passages open only to them. Others said the clay vessels were not ordinary objects, but keys that kept the city in balance so it would not sink beneath the desert. No one truly knew, and perhaps no one was allowed to know. In the end, they continued to appear, continued to walk, continued to vanish, leaving behind nothing but the coldness lingering in the air. In the heart of the city, now nothing but a shadow, stood a temple rarely mentioned in official records. A structure more often hidden behind dunes of sand than visible to the eye. The temple was not as tall as a pyramid, nor as majestic as an obelisk piercing the sky. Yet there was something in its form that made people reluctant to approach. Its walls were built of dark stone that seemed to reject light, deepening shadows even when the sun blazed overhead. Its gate was never fully closed, always slightly ajar, as if waiting, yet at the same time reminding that not every invitation should be answered. Inside, narrow twisting corridors stretched like the intestines of some giant creature, filled with carvings unlike known Egyptian artruffer, darker, emphasizing faces that seemed to scream in silence. The townsfolk rarely spoke of this temple, and when they did, their voices lowered, as though its very name might awaken something dwelling within. Belief held that the temple was not merely a house of worship, but a vessel to contain something that must never be released. Some said beneath it lay a vast chamber, a belly of the earth holding statues of women without eyes, veiled in black cloth so they would gaze upon no one. Others believed the temple was in fact a prison, where foreign spirits were locked away so they would not disturb the city's balance. No one could be certain, For those who ventured too deep seldom returned with the same face even if their bodies emerged intact. Their eyes seemed hollow, as though direction had been stripped away. At nightfall, the temple seemed to awaken. Shadows that had been still began to move along the walls, following the carvings as if they had come alive. From afar, some claimed to hear whispers, not in human tongue, but faint chimes like metal brushing against itself. Foreign merchants swore they had seen a greenish glow seeped from the cracks in the stone, pulsing like a breathing heart. Yet all of this remained only story, for the townsfolk chose not to seek truth, allowing the temple to remain part of a mystery that need never be explained. Among those who lived in the city, there was a small group of watchmen who never truly slept. Men who seemed assigned to guard something they were forbidden even to name. They wore no distinctive clothing, or carried symbols of authority that set them apart from others. Yet everyone knew who they were. Their eyes carried restless glimmers, their bodies thin as if diminished by endless nights that never truly ended. While others shut their doors as night descended, these watchmen wandered instead, patrolling silently through dusty streets, carrying torches whose flames burned dim, as if intentionally muted to avoid drawing the attention of anything other than humans. Their work was not recorded in official papyri of the kingdom, as though their existence were only shadows slipping between larger tales of pharaohs and civilization. Yet whispers among the townsfolk claimed they circled the dark temple each night, ensuring no stranger dared venture too deep. Some believed they did more than guard, they listened, pressing their ears to the stone walls to make sure whatever dwelled inside remained asleep. Occasionally, passers-by swore they saw one of the watchmen freeze, staring into darkness as if hearing a summons. No one dared to ask what they had heard, for the answer might be more terrifying than silence itself. Children often mimicked the steps of the watchmen in play, imitating their quick yet noiseless stride, the way their trembling hands held torches. Parents scolded them, forbidding such games, for imitation meant invitation, and no one wished to invite what was meant to stay locked away. Yet even in their attempts to forget, the presence of the watchman remained a constant reminder that the city kept secrets not easily opened. When dawn arrived and sunlight washed over the sands, the watchmen slowly disappeared, their faces expressionless, as if the long night had been nothing more than a dream that must be stored away in silence. Though the watchman's presence lingered each night, the city's daily life appeared to follow ordinary rhythms. The market opened at dawn, filled with the scent of spices, warm bread, and faded-colored cloth displayed by merchants. Women pounded wheat in their courtyards. Children ran laughing through the dusty lanes. And men hauled carts of stone or timber to build new homes on the city's edge. Yet beneath this appearance of normalcy lay an unwritten rule shared by all. No one dared speak too loudly of the Dark Temple. Even its name was rarely spoken, as though the tongue might burn simply by uttering it. Whenever someone's gaze accidentally drifted toward the temple from afar, a small ritual followed. They would spit upon the ground or touch the amulet hanging from their neck. No one knew precisely when this custom began, yet it seemed passed down from generation to generation, needing no explanation. Newcomers to the city often found it strange, till they too felt the creeping chill when their eyes met the shadow of the temple's black walls. Soon after, they learned to bow their heads, as if instinctively accepting that something greater than mere tradition demanded it. Beneath it all, the community's daily life revolved around something never openly acknowledged. People married, bore children, and celebrated harvests, but always with a subtle caution, as if their existence balanced upon an invisible precipice. They knew the city sustained them, but also imprisoned something that must not be stirred. And though their lips remained sealed, every step, every gesture, every small custom was proof that the temple never truly left their minds. Rumors of what dwelt inside the temple always circulated in hazy, layered tales, as if deliberately told both to frighten and to warn. Some claimed the temple was where ancient priests bound their souls to avoid death, leaving their bodies as empty shells while their spirits wandered behind the walls. Others believed the temple held a voice not of this world, a voice heard only on moonless nights when the desert winds ceased and the world felt frozen. Those who strayed too near claimed to hear whispers beyond explanation, whispers that beckoned softly yet left a piercing fear deep within. Darker tales spoke of secret sacrifices said to continue across unknown generations. It was said that once every few decades, someone vanished without trace, never found. And though no one admitted it aloud, all knew where they had gone. Children grew up hearing such stories, not as fairy tales for amusement, but as warnings never to wander too far. Even the elders, with dimming eyes and weakening bodies, held on to the same fear as though time had never dulled the power of the legend. Most unsettling of all were fragments of an ancient papyrus, nearly destroyed, which suggested this city was not built solely for humankind. The Dark Temple, according to the barely legible writing, was some kind of doorway, or perhaps a key, preserving the balance between the world of the living and something far beyond their understanding. No one knew the full meaning, for the papyrus was broken, yet it was enough to stir deep unease in any reader. Thus the rumors never truly faded, instead becoming part of the city's breath, like sand that could never be driven from the desert air. The temple's guardians, though few in number, were always an inseparable part of the city's life. They never mingled with ordinary townsfolk, yet their presence lingered in every corner, as though their shadows followed people from afar. These guardians were known for their dark garments, unchanged across generations. Long cloths that covered nearly their entire bodies, with their faces veiled by thin shrouds, making it impossible to tell whether they were young or old. They rarely spoke, and when their voices were heard, it was always low, almost like murmurs swallowed by the desert air. Some claimed they did not speak a human tongue at all, but recited something passed down through countless ages, a dialect never fully understood, not even by the elders of the city. Their routines seemed simple, yet filled with relentless devotion. At dawn, before the sun touched the city's rooftops, they marched toward the temple. They moved in perfect unison, soundless, as though each motion had been choreographed centuries before. The temple doors opened only for them, and from outside, one heard only faint echoes of footsteps before silence reclaimed the air. No one knew what they did inside, though some speculated they lit a sacred fire, recited forgotten prayers, or even conversed with something hidden within the walls. When they emerged, their faces remained expressionless, as if untouched by the burdens of the outside world. At night, their shadows reappeared, roaming the city with small lanterns. Some believed they guarded against dark spirits escaping the temple, while others insisted they searched for lost souls to be offered in sacrifice. Though many feared them, none dared defy them, for whenever someone mocked or insulted the guardians, by the next day, that person was gone, vanished without trace, as though swallowed by the earth. Thus the guardians were not merely symbols of the temple itself, but living reminders that some things must never be disturbed, never questioned, and never touched by those who wished to live in peace. Daily life in the city that grew around the temple seemed to flow like that of any other ancient settlement, yet there was always a subtle undercurrent of tension within it. The marketplace remained busy with merchants selling spices, fabrics, and pottery. Voices of bargaining filled the air. Children ran through the narrow streets laughing, and women drew water from the communal well while exchanging stories. Yet beneath the noise and bustle, a quiet awareness lingered in every mind, that they lived under the shadow of something older, greater, and darker than their own lives. The temple stood in the distance, watching over all activity, and though no one mentioned it in everyday conversation, everyone knew its presence shaped the rhythm of their lives, both directly and invisibly. Every house in the city was built of sun-hardened mud brick walls, some decorated with simple carvings depicting scenes of daily life, such as harvests or family rituals. Yet no home ever dared build a window facing directly toward the temple. Even the narrow streets were deliberately designed to curve so that the sacred structure would never dominate their view. It was as if the city's builders understood that staring too long at the temple could summon something unwanted. Strangely, though the temple was considered dangerous, the city's existence was never truly separate from it. The irrigation water that nourished the fields flowed from canals that ran close to its walls, and many believed that the land's fertility came from something seeping out from within the structure itself. The people of the city lived with a blend of reverence and fear. They celebrated the harvest with music and dancing, but whenever the drums grew too loud, the elders would bow their heads, reminding others that too much joy might awaken the spirit that slept inside the temple. Children were told stories that if they played too close to its outer walls, they might be pulled in and never return. The boldest of youths sometimes dared to approach at night, but always came back pale-faced, unable to explain what they had seen or heard. Thus, daily life in the city was an odd mixture of simple happiness and a shadow that never fully disappeared, a fragile balance that seemed to have endured for centuries. When night arrived, the city transformed in a way that only those who lived within it could truly feel. Oil lamps flickered in every home, their light trembling softly against mud brick walls, casting long shadows that shifted with the night breeze. The once busy market slowly closed down, leaving only a few merchants gathering their last goods. The streets grew silent. The laughter of children vanished, replaced by the sound of wind slipping through narrow alleys. Yet behind that silence, there was always something else, something that could not be explained in words. As if the night carried a different kind of life that could only be sensed with deeper awareness. The temple in the distance appeared far larger beneath the moonlight. Its walls reflected the pale glow, making the carvings stand out more vividly, and every shadow cast upon the ground looked like a being moving of its own accord. Few dared to walk outside after sunset unless absolutely necessary. They believed the spirits of ancient guardians roamed at night, circling the temple, watching anyone who came too close. Occasionally, sounds like the scraping of stone or the weight of heavy footsteps drifted from the direction of the temple. Though upon inspection, nothing was ever found. Such stories became the whispers that filled the night, passed down from one generation to the next. Yet, despite the fear, there were also moments when the night offered undeniable beauty. The full moon hanging in the sky illuminated wheat fields swaying gently. Stars sparkled as if scattering light above rooftops, and the sound of water flowing through the canals echoed like a soft song calming the heart. But even in those moments, the people knew that tranquility was only a surface. Beneath the beautiful sky and the cooling air, the temple remained with its heavy silence, as though guarding secrets that must never be revealed. Night, for this city, was always a space between calm and tension, between beauty and fear, a balance that held life from falling too far into either side. Behind the silence of night and the looming shadow of the temple, people believed there was something deeper, a layer of reality unseen by ordinary eyes. The temple was not merely a place of offering, but was thought to be a gate connecting the human world with another realm beyond comprehension. Some ancient priests wrote that beneath the temple floor lay a hidden chamber, never to be opened, guarded by laws older than any dynasty. That chamber was believed to contain objects not only precious in material value, but also carrying powers beyond human understanding. No one truly knew what was stored there, yet a shadow of fear always surrounded it, as if every stone of the temple vibrated with whispers it did not wish to share. The surviving historical records, though faint and often fragmented, mention sacrifices made to keep that secret sealed. It was said that certain individuals were chosen not to live, but to rest within the temple walls. Their bodies buried without names, without markers. So their spirits would become eternal guardians, rejecting anyone who dared to open the chamber. To this day, no one knows if that tale is true or simply a warning devised to instill fear. Yet, as night deepens, the shadows cast upon the temple walls seem to come alive, as if figures stand motionless among the carvings, staring outward at anyone bold enough to watch for too long. This mystery could never be fully answered, for each time someone tried to uncover it, there was always a boundary they could not cross. Whether it was an overwhelming fear or strange occurrences that forced them to retreat, the result was the same. For the city's inhabitants, this was accepted as a natural part of life, something not meant to be touched. But for outsiders, curiosity burned like a flame, difficult to extinguish. That was why the city was often visited by strangers hoping to unearth the temple's secret. Though nearly all left with more questions than answers. The temple stood firm, the night cloaked it still, and the buried secret remained silent, as if waiting for the right moment to speak again. There was an old tale passed down from mouth to mouth, told in hushed voices as if the night wind itself were listening. The tale spoke of a door to the hidden chamber beneath the temple, not made of stone or metal, but of light. On certain nights, when the moon reached a particular position, beam would fall upon the floor, forming a pattern, and only by following the path of that light could one find the way. Yet the light was not visible to all, it appeared only to those deemed worthy by an unseen force. This was why many had tried and always failed, as if they became lost in the same place, though the temple floor had never changed. Some explorers recorded strange experiences within the temple. Some felt their steps never reached the end, as if the corridor stretched endlessly. Others claimed to hear faint voices, not human, but like echoes rising from behind the stone, speaking in an unknown tongue. The sound would sometimes ring clear, then vanish, leaving behind an emptiness difficult to describe. There were even those who swore they saw glimmers of gold in the darkness, though when they approached, only a cold, empty wall awaited. All these experiences were written as accounts without proof, yet they added further layers of mystery to the temple's legend. The city's own inhabitants never attempted to unlock the secret. They believed everything had its time, and not all mysteries were meant to be revealed. Some elders even said that the temple's secret was not for humankind, but for the gods themselves, who might one day return to claim it. With this belief, they lived their daily lives untroubled by the hidden chamber's presence. Yet still, when night descended and shadows stretched long across the temple walls, there lingered a feeling hard to escape, the sense that something waited beyond, something perhaps never meant to be found, yet calling out with whispers that could never be fully ignored. There exists an ancient record discovered on a fragment of papyrus, written in ink so faded it is nearly unreadable, set by those patient enough to trace each fractured line. The papyrus does not name a city, nor a ruling king, but speaks of a place where the earth's voice could be heard, like a long breath exhaled beneath the sand. The text describes that those who dared approach would feel the ground beneath their feet pulse faintly, like a living heart, though no body could be explained. Historians who studied the text could not agree whether the description was metaphorical or truly an account of lived experience. What was clear, however, was the papyrus carried a tone of fear, as if the writer penned the words in haste, trying to leave a warning for whoever might read them in the future. Some scholars speculated that the earth's breath mentioned in the text might refer to natural phenomena, such as shifting sand layers or currents of air from an underground cavern. Yet still, it was difficult to explain why the writer described it in such personal terms, as if in dialogue with something conscious. One line even stated that the whisper called out a human name, though no name was written clearly. This sparked wild speculation that the chamber beneath the ancient city was not merely an empty space, but a kind of prison or vessel for something that must never awaken. Modern people who hear the tale often wonder how those of the past could live alongside such beliefs. Yet if we look closely, ancient cities were often built on the foundation of faith that the world was never fully visible. There was a world behind the world, another layer touched only when humans brushed against both fear and wonder. The forgotten city buried beneath the Egyptian desert may be the quietest example of all a place that holds more questions than answers. And with every story that arises from it, the mist of mystery only thickens rather than clears. On a night rarely remembered, there is a tale of wanderers lost in the desert who accidentally discovered great stones arranged like a doorway. They said the wind that blew around it felt different, carrying a damp scent, though rain had never fallen in that place. The stone door had no carvings, no hieroglyphs to offer meaning, only smooth surfaces as if freshly carved, though the sand around it had swallowed millennia. When they tried to approach, a sound echoed from within, as though an immense hollow space lay behind it. The sound did not resemble an animal nor a human, but something beyond explanation. A vibration that seeped straight into the chest. Those who experienced it refused to return, and some fell ill days later without any clear cause. This story has no archaeological proof to affirm it, yet it has always circulated from mouth to mouth, retold by village fires or written faintly in the journals of travelers. Some believe the doorway was the gate to the lost city, while others suggest it was merely an unfinished monument. But one impression remains difficult to dismiss: the sense that something was being guarded, hidden, or perhaps even imprisoned behind the layers of stone and sand. If we reflect further, ancient Egypt was indeed a land of doorways, both literal and symbolic. Doors to tombs, doors to sacred chambers, doors to the world after death. Every doorway signaled a threshold between the world humans could reach and the world they could only imagine. So it is no wonder that the tale of the stone doorway in the desert adds another layer to the mystery of forgotten cities. Perhaps the doorway never truly existed. Perhaps it was born only from the fear of those lost at night. Yet, like all legends, it lives on because the world seems to require mysteries that never fully open. There is a recurring idea when speaking of Egypt's forgotten cities, the notion that what is buried is not merely stones and ruins, but also a warning deliberately left behind, as if the ancients knew that the future would always thirst for knowledge, yet certain secrets were not meant to be opened easily. The desert patiently keeps it all, turning it into a blank sheet covering the records of the past. Each time the wind scatters the sand and reveals a portion of wall, floor, or foundation, it feels as though a faint message is being whispered. But the message is never complete, never entirely legible, always leaving a gap that invites curiosity. Some scholars believe the existence of these lost cities shows how fragile civilization can be, how swiftly it may be swallowed by time. Yet others suggest otherwise, that their destruction and disappearance were not accidents, but deliberate choices by those who once lived there. Perhaps they chose to close the door to future generations, maybe because the knowledge they held was dangerous, or because the power they wielded should not be repeated. Like the myths of gods who abandoned the earth, perhaps these cities too left their trace intentionally to exist only as shadows in stories. What is compelling about this perspective is not its certainty, but the calm that comes with it. As though we are invited to accept that not everything must be solved, not every secret must be explained. There is value in allowing something to remain hidden, just as the night holds silence without needing to be filled with light. These buried cities may not be only remnants of architecture, but also mirrors of humanity's longing for mystery. In the stillness of the desert, they remain not to be solved, but to be remembered in their obscurity. When night falls over the desert, the twinkling stars above are often seen as watchful eyes, keeping the earth's secrets. They witness how the lost cities remain asleep beneath the layers of sand, untouched by the noise of the modern world. In the silence of the night, one can almost hear the echo of footsteps across stone streets, the bustle of markets, or the chant of rituals now reduced to faint shadows. These shadows appear not as answers, but as reminders that everything once existed, once breathed, then disappeared. And though gone, it continues to live in another form, that of mystery. Some travelers who camp near the ruins speak of a presence they cannot explain, not frightening, but calm and filled with an aura difficult to grasp. They seem to be invited to listen to stories never spoken, stories that can only be understood through silence. Perhaps this is how the cities continue to speak, not with words, but with an absence stronger than presence itself. When one sits quietly, allowing the desert wind to sweep across the face, there is a sense that time halts, and in that moment, one realizes they are in the company of something older than memory. This may be the reason why forgotten cities always captivate. Not merely for the treasures that might lie beneath, nor simply to know who built them and how they lived. The true allure lies in the stillness, in the way it invites us to pause and accept that the world holds more unseen than seen. Every grain of sand is a guardian, every gust of wind a marker of time, and every ruin a fragment of a puzzle that does not need solving. These cities live on in absence, in silence that continues to call, and in a mystery that never fades. In the end, the deeper one tries to understand the buried cities, the more they realize that knowledge is only the surface of something far greater. The ruins, inscriptions, and artifacts do provide clues, but never enough to paint a complete picture. It is precisely this incompleteness that makes them eternal, for humans are always compelled to imagine what has been lost. In that imagination, the forgotten cities live again, with streets filled with merchants, houses breathing with life, and temples echoing with prayers that will never again be heard. Imagination becomes the bridge, and through it we learn that history is not only about what is recorded, but also about what is left unanswered. As one walks among scattered stones, it feels like hearing a conversation without sound. There are long pauses filled by the whisper of sand, an emptiness that is paradoxically full of meaning. These cities seem to want to teach something unwritten, that silence can be more eloquent than words. For those who listen, the lesson comes not as rigid fact, but as inner experience, an acknowledgement that not every mystery must be solved. Some things are destined to remain blurred, so that humankind will always remember its limitations. Thus, the forgotten cities of ancient Egypt are not merely proof of architecture or missing records, but mirrors for those who seek them. Mirrors showing how small humans are before time and how vast the space is for curiosity. In that reflection, we find that mystery is not an obstacle, but part of the beauty that makes the world feel inexhaustible. These cities dwell in silence, Yet from that silence arises an eternity untouched by time. And finally, as night descends upon the vast desert, the shadows of those cities fade once more, swallowed by time. No one truly knows whether they will ever be fully revealed or remain forever hidden beneath the shifting sands. What remains is only a silence, like an old tale whispered gently before sleep. Those cities linger between reality and dream, as if waiting for someone brave enough to listen to the faint voices that remain. In that uncertainty lies their beauty, for mystery is always more eternal than answers. And for those who close their eyes tonight, the images of forgotten cities will come like a soft dream, carrying an endless sense of wonder, and perhaps that is how ancient Egypt keeps its secrets.